Have you ever really looked at moss? You know, that green stuff growing on a tree or in the cracks of the sidewalk? It seems so, I don't know, simple. But that little patch of green has an absolutely wild life story. So let's dive in and uncover the secret life of one of the oldest plants on the planet.
Right? We see it pretty much everywhere. This velvety green carpet on forest floors, on old walls. But how does it get there? How does it actually live? And how does it make more of itself? Well, that's the story we're going to unravel today, looking at its complex life cycle as described in our source material.
Okay, take a look at this. This is the moss we all know and recognize, right? But here's the kicker. This familiar leafy green part, that's only one half of the story. It's just one of two totally distinct generations in a single life cycle. It's like we're only seeing Act 1 of a two-act play.
So, to understand the story, we need to meet our main character. This is the part of the moss we see most of the time, the dominant part of its life. It's called the gametophyte. Pretty much all that green stuff you actually think of as moss, yeah, that's our hero right there.
So the key thing to get here is that the gametophyte is that main leafy plant that kicks off its whole life from a single tiny spore. It's the foundation, the very bedrock of the entire moss life cycle.
But our hero doesn't just pop into existence looking all leafy and perfect. Nope. It's got its own two-stage growing up process. You can kind of think of it like a seedling phase and then an adult phase. Let's break those down.
First step is the protonema stage. So when a spore lands in a nice damp spot, it doesn't just sprout into the moss we know. Instead, it grows into this creeping thread-like network of green filaments. It's this humble, often totally unseen beginning for our main character. Now, from that web of threads, the second stage kicks in, the leafy stage. And this is the moss we recognize, with its little upright shoots and tiny leaves. It uses these things called rhizoids to hang on, but its most important job, its whole purpose really, is to develop the male and female sex organs, and those are absolutely critical for the next chapter in our story, making more moss.
And that brings us to the really dramatic part of the whole story, reproduction. So how does our gametophyte hero make sure the family line continues? Well, turns out it has a couple of different strategies up its sleeve.
So on one hand, it can just reproduce vegetatively. This is the simple way out. A piece breaks off, or a little bud forms, and it just grows into a new plant that's genetically identical. It's cloning, basically. But the much more complex and way more fascinating path is sexual reproduction.
This is where those sex organs we just talked about come into play. Through fertilization, a single cell called a zygote is formed. And this one cell, this zygote, holds the complete blueprint for the entire second half of the moss's life story.
And here's where it gets really, really weird. That zygote, it doesn't go anywhere. It stays put and starts growing directly out of its parent, the gametophyte. Think about that. It's a completely new generation living, literally, on top of the old one.
So this new structure that's growing out of the parent, that's the other major player in our story, the sporophyte. This is Act 2 of the play, and it has a very specific, single-minded mission. The sporophyte doesn't look anything like its green, leafy parent. It's more like a tiny mission control tower. It's totally dependent on the gametophyte for food and water, and its entire reason for being is to produce and then launch the next generation of spores out into the world.
And if you look at its structure, you can see how it's perfectly designed for this job. It's got a foot that plugs right into its parent. It has a long stalk, called a seta, to get some height. And then at the very top, there's the capsule. And this capsule, this is the business end of the whole operation.
Because inside that little capsule, a special kind of cell division called meiosis is happening. And this process creates thousands upon thousands of tiny genetically unique spores. The mission is almost complete. The capsule is loaded and ready to go.
This is the grand finale. This is the completion of the cycle. The moss has this really cool, elaborate mechanism to pop open that capsule and release the spores, sending them out on the wind to find a new place to call home. And every one of those spores that lands successfully can grow into a new protonema, starting our hero's journey all over again.
So, the next time you see a patch of green moss, look a little closer. Are you just seeing the leafy gametophyte, our main character? Or can you spot those tiny little stalks of the Sporophyte generation, reaching up to the sky, getting ready to release their spores? You're not just looking at a plant, you're actually witnessing a specific moment in an epic, two-part story that's been going on for hundreds of millions of years.